Hey CNC, welcome to CNC Bitesize. Over the summer we're going to be thinking about the topic spiritual habits for uncertain times, and I'd really encourage you as well to have a look on the worship section of our YouTube channel, because there's some really great worship that the worship team have been recorded socially distant. So maybe after this, if you want to worship, have a look over there. But this morning I would like to start us off in our new series. I hope that this series offers a bit of a toolkit that will help us as we carry on through this experience of a global pandemic. We are in some pretty uncertain times as people living in the 21st century, particularly in the West. We often have a very low tolerance for uncertainty. We're used to feeling in control. We're not used to being powerless. We haven't built up the resilience for dealing with uncertainty. Particularly, and I guess this is in the nature of what uncertainty is, but when we're dealing with uncertainty for an extended and indefinite period of time, which is very much the current situation, the reality is we don't know how long the influences of Corona are going to be part of our world. It could be 6 months, it could be 2 years, it could be 5 years. We really don't know. We are living in the middle of uncertain times. Uncertainty is not an unfamiliar concept to all humanity, but it is something I think that in our culture today is quite unfamiliar to us. If you grew up in a war zone or in a place of generational poverty, or even, and there might be a few who fit in this category, you grew up during World War II, you would have more of a framework for the idea that uncertainty is part of life. However, for many of us growing up, the reality of uncertainty is a new thing. We are a generation that is used to growing up with the power of choice. In particular, in light of the influence of consumerism, that as you buy, you gain control through the power of choice, something that has become particularly popular since the 1970s. We have, in my opinion, been given the illusion that we have far more control than we actually do. Control, to an extent, is an illusion. I don't think we've ever had the amount of control that we might believe. The illusion of control, though, is really problematic. It was problematic before the global pandemic as well as it is now. Because the strange thing is, for a generation of people who believe that we have an enormous amount of control, and for a generation of people who maybe have had more control than ever before, certainly I think if you're a woman, that's the case. We have more control now than we did 100 years ago or 200 years ago. Yet we are one of the most anxious generations of all time. I read a stat today, it really shocked me, but it said that 1 in 3 teenagers will experience an anxiety disorder. 1 in 3 teenagers will experience and struggle with anxiety. These numbers are on the increase. Between 2007 and 2012, anxiety disorders in children and teens has gone up by 20%. So we are an anxious generation, and the generation coming are also an anxious generation, significantly, weirdly more anxious than the generation that grew up in World War II and that living in the 1950s, which oddly has been actually described as one of the happiest generations. Why is it that we feel so much more anxious than a community that grew up in the Blitz? It seems bizarre. In a society dominated by control, a huge amount of pressure is put on individuals. And I wonder if that's why we are so anxious. Because when you believe you have control over your life, that is a huge amount of pressure when you're making decisions and choices. Because if you make the wrong choice, if you use your control wrong, you somehow fail. It's a lot of pressure to make the right decision all the time. In a society dominated by the illusion of control, our identity comes from the choices that we make and the control we have. That puts an enormous amount of pressure on. So how do we cope when this control is taken away, or this illusion that we have control is taken away? Well, this morning I want to talk about rebellious rest. Rest when it seems counterintuitive. And I want to do that through talking about a story from the Old Testament about a man called Elijah, who is talked about in the book of 1 Kings. I'm just going to read a little bit of 1 Kings 19, 1 to 9. Now, King Ahab told Jezebel everything Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. So Jezebel sent a message to Elijah to say, "May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them." Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there, while he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. He came to a broom bush, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. "I have had enough, Lord," he said. "Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors." Then he lay down under a bush and fell asleep. All at once, an angel touched him and said, "Get up and eat." He looked around, and there by his head was some bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank and then lay down again. The angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, "Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you." So he got up and ate and drank. Strengthened by that food, he travelled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. There he went into a cave and spent the night. So Elijah was this Old Testament prophet who was around in the time of King Ahab and Queen Jezebel. And most of Elijah's life was spent going against the grain of the culture. Jezebel was a queen who worshipped other gods than the God of Yahweh, the God of the people of Israel. And so Elijah spent a lot of his time kind of in direct opposition to the queen, constantly coming up against different prophets. And there's a particularly, he's quite an epic and gruesome tale, the story of Elijah. It'd make quite a good film probably, but he is constantly coming into violent conflict with the prophets of Baal. And in 1 Kings 19, he's just had a victory against the prophets of Baal. And then he gets this message from the queen who basically says, "I'm going to do to you what you just did to them. So you're about to get, I'm coming to get you." Another threat against his life. And Elijah, right in the ministry, the middle of his ministry of calling God's people to faithfulness, right in the middle of actually a big victory, in the face of another threat, like one more thing to make his life uncertain, I think has pretty much a full meltdown. He runs away frustrated and then collapses, completely broken, completely exhausted, completely burnt out. I think actually when you read the story of 1 Kings, it would be easy to argue that Elijah is someone who struggles quite a lot with depression, with a sense of futility, with a sense of burnout. And he is in this place of absolute collapse and absolute burnout when he sleeps. And in that place of absolute burnout, of depression, of a lack of hope, God comes and he feeds him. An angel wakes Elijah up and says, "You need to eat." And he eats, and then he goes back to sleep, and then the angel wakes him up again and says, "You need to eat because you need to keep moving, you need to keep running." And so he eats again. God affirms the fact that Elijah needs to rest. He doesn't give him a motivational pep talk or the near kind of ancient East version of coffee and tells him to keep calm and carry on. He doesn't say, "You need to keep being productive, you need to keep following my plan, you need to go back and take on Jezebel." He gives him some bread and some water and he lets him sleep. He affirms, I think, that a need for rest is a good thing. God isn't just interested in Elijah and what he does, he's interested in Elijah as a whole person. I love that it's God that brings food. God is interested in the little things as well as the big. In uncertain times, times of opposition and difficulty, rest is a rebellion against the illusion of choice. Rest is an act of rebellion against the illusion of choice. I'll show you. I want you to consider an example of a time where you had the time or the space to rest. Maybe an evening off or a day off or a holiday. and you ended up, instead of taking that rest, working in some way, whatever work looks like to you. Think of a time where you could have had some time off and you ended up working. Why did you continue to work? Now, some of you might say, well, actually, no, it was technically a day off, but I had to get it in, had to get the work in. Why? Now, I'm sure there are various reasons for each of us why sometimes when we have time to rest, we choose to work. But I wonder if one of those reasons was something along the lines of, I need to keep producing, or I need to keep producing, or there will be consequences. If I don't do this, ... will happen. I need to keep working because I need to stay in control. In a choice-centric culture, where control is king, the potential for production is infinite, and therefore not producing all the time creates anxiety. Where doing more, getting more, choosing more, having more, experiencing more is the highest value, when you're not actively engaged in production, in work, in some way or another, it creates anxiety because we've somehow fallen out of the loop. Because if we stop, we lose control. It's a recipe, I hope, in a way we can sort of recognise for burnout, for the burnout of Elijah, reaching a point where we can no longer produce. But there is good news, because this choice loop, this belief structure that can keep us working even when we need to rest, and even sometimes when we actually have space to rest, loses power when it is faced with the presence of God. The very existence of God as creator immediately hints at the idea that we do not in fact ever have all the control that we might hope for. If God is creator, if he is active in the world, if his decisions, his choices impact humanity, then it's impossible for humans to ever be fully in control. And a pursuit of control becomes not only futile, but just a bit stupid. Rest, and taking rest, is the reminder that we were not put primarily on earth to produce, to consume and to choose, but to be loved by God. With God at the centre of control, we are released to not have to spend all our energy trying to keep on top of things and trying to keep in control, because we know we don't have that control at all. Jesus, who lives this ultimate human life, seems to rest an awful lot of the time. Whether we choose to rest or not says something critical about where we believe our value is and what we believe our value to be. It's a testament to a belief in grace. Grace is simply the idea that actually we do not get just what we produce. We do not just get back what we put in, but we get infinitely more than we deserve, because God chooses to give us more than we deserve. It takes us out of the cycle that we gain more control by putting in more, by investing more, by working more. And in fact enables us to take times and space to rest, knowing that actually we don't have to exist in this choice, production, consumer loop that so much of our culture feels entangled and trapped by. There are times that we do not have to be reactionary immediately to every situation. I came recently from living and working in London, where I think I saw this work control loop over and over again in churches actually, and also in and around with people I know working in all sorts of industries. And as people who follow Jesus, whether that's something you do or not, we have an important challenge to model rest in times of uncertainty and in times of anxiety and in times where we feel out of control, because it says something about who we believe is in control. I heard a great phrase, which was that taking a day off is the reminder that God is God and we are not, which I think is really true. Resting, though, when we're unused to it, can initially create anxiety as we grapple and we panic with that tension that part of us is kind of believing that we should still be in control, believing that we should be moving forward and producing. It is a practice that we have to practice. That's why it's called a practice. It takes work. And if you are someone who is in that place of kind of hitting that burnout wall, it's going to feel very difficult for a while. But as we invest in that practice, we are growing and gaining resilience to help us as we continue to face uncertainty. One of the biggest traps, I think, of uncertainty is to believe that there is not space for rest in it, that we must kind of hold on, white knuckle ride until things improve. And the reality is that's, in my opinion, not the case at all, because God is as in control now as he was when we felt like we were in control. It's just that now we're more aware that we're not. And so my encouragement as we're sort of in the summer holidays, whether you're taking time off or not, is to choose to be rebellious with our rest, to choose to take those times of rest, even when our instinct is telling us to do otherwise, to practice the process of rest. So that is my challenge for the week, and it's good to rest. It's a nice one, I hope. So that is all I want to say today. I hope that you've had a good week so far. I hope that you get spaces to practice that, the rest of uncertainty. And I'd love to hear how it goes if you want to share. Great. Have a good week. Bye-bye.